There's a strange little turn of phrase in Romans where the Apostle Paul is talking about Abraham in chapter 4 and verse 18. And the King James says, who against hope believed in hope. The New King James says, who contrary to hope, in hope believed. The idea is that we might say there was no earthly hope. And when there was no earthly hope, Abraham put his hope in God. And recently I was talking to a friend. He's spending many years behind bars. God saved him in a wonderful way. The only one really in his family who was saved. And he was telling me of the joy he had leading his 89-year-old grandmother to Christ. She came on a prison visit, and she saw the dramatic change in her grandson. And she said, if God can do that to you, he can do it to me. And he had the joy of pointing her to Christ. She was a religious woman, had attended church all her life, and so on, but she didn't know the Lord. And against hope, you would say an 89-year-old woman, she'd lived her whole life in the church, and what hope would there be? But against hope, he believed in hope. Against any earthly hope, he believed in hope because his hope was in the Lord. And I know I'm speaking to some people, and maybe you have an old father, a grandfather, an uncle, maybe a neighbor, and they just seem set in concrete. And when you've tried to talk to them, they brush you away, and they don't seem to be interested. It's not a matter of don't give up on them. It's a matter of don't give up on God. God is the Savior of all men, especially of those who believe. And so when we realize that the price has already been paid, the work has already been done, the Spirit has already been working in convicting them of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And we are privileged to sow seed, and perhaps the seed has already been sown. And you go and look at it, there's nothing to show for it, and then one day you see a little green sprout, and it begins to grow. Faith begins to prod their hearts, and we should never give up. When I thought about my friend, I thought of a story my father wrote years ago. It's in a book that I compiled with him called The Watered Garden, and it's just a one-page article called 70 Years in the Sanctuary. And it tells a story about himself and a brother Neil Dougal of Worcester, Massachusetts. Often they would go for a series of gospel meetings, preaching every night for several weeks. And so this is how the story goes. She was old and frail. Many years of domicile in the United States had not in the slightest taken the tartan edge off her broad Scottish accent. No longer able to attend the meetings of the Lord's people, she was lovingly cared for by her daughter and son-in-law. She sat in a rocker in the corner of the living room, back and forth, back and forth. However, she was not idle. She was a woman of prayer. My colleague and I were engaged in a gospel series in the city where she lived, and were considering bringing the series to an end on the next Lord's Day, when we were invited for a meal and a visit with old Aunt Sarah. She greeted us warmly with the comment, "I hope you boys are not going to stop those meetings yet." Well, we were planning to do just that on the Lord's Day. And don't forget my brother Jimmy. I've prayed for him for 70 years. Uncle Jimmy was 80 and lived only a few blocks away, so we decided we would drop over and see him and invite him out to the meetings. We were warned that he was a wee hard-headed Scot, and if you know anything about that breed, you'll know they're not easily persuaded. Both my father and Neil Dougal were Scots, so they knew all about that. We found his place and knocked on the door. A fresh-faced, handsome gentleman opened it. His shining white hair enhanced his rosy cheeks. Short of stature, but evidently sprightly, he invited us in. He indicated where we should sit, and he took his place in a well-worn chair that was positioned so that he could watch two different baseball games going on at the same time on two televisions, one in the bedroom and the other in the living room. He also had one going in the kitchen, in case he had to go in the fridge for a drink, he explained. So there we were, trying to talk to this man about his never-dying soul, and all he could think about, it seemed, was baseball. At last defeated, we left the old man to his preoccupation. Next day, we thought we should try again. So in the morning, hopefully before baseball, we knocked on his door. Noises indicated someone was there. He lived alone, but our Scottish friend didn't answer. Again, defeated, we left. What are we going to do about Uncle Jimmy? Another day, so much to do, an unlikely prospect, and we confessed not much hope of a favorable response. Then we remembered the old prayer warrior, rocking back and forth and pleading her case in the presence of God. We were ready to give up after a couple of days, and she had prayed for 70 years. Ashamed of our lack of heart, we made our way again to the wee Scotsman's home. Our knock was quickly answered this time. It was almost as though we were expected. "Come in, boys," he greeted us with his fresh-faced smile. The welcome was so warm and generous, I wondered if it was a trap. "Been thinking about you, boys. I have a good story that you could use." "Sit down," he said. We sat. Then he regaled us with a long tale about a man getting on the wrong train. "Uncle Jimmy," I said when he'd finished, "don't you see? You are the man in the story. You're the man on the wrong train." He sat back in his chair as though he'd been hit. "Uncle Jimmy," said my colleague, "why don't you give up all your arguments and take Christ as your Savior and be saved?" "You know, boys, I think I'd better just do that," he said, and rising from his chair, he went over to an old sofa and got on his knees, we with him. "Oh God," he cried out with emotion, "forgive me for all my folly and save me from my sins." All the power of 70 years of praying landed on his head in 5 minutes, and old Uncle Jimmy passed from death into life. He lived for 2 more years to prove the reality of his salvation. We bundled him into the car, drove him the 6 blocks to his old sister's house, and shoved him in the door. What a sight! The old prayer warrior got out of her rocking chair, and the 2 old-timers tottered across the room to embrace each other. "Oh, Jimmy, Jimmy," Sarah wept. "You're saved at last. I prayed for you for 70 years. We wept for joy with them and laughed aloud at the grace and mercy of our God and the wonderful love that follows the sinner to the very end." Well, they're both in the glory now, and of course, so is my father and Neil Dougal, beholding the face of the one they love. Those long 70 years of prayer on earth must seem now but the briefest moment from eternity's point of view. Have you prayed long for that loved one? Faint not. God is, quote, able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Ephesians 3:20. When all earthly hope is gone, we still have the God of hope. And Abraham against hope, when hope seemed to be against him, when there was no hope, he believed in hope because he knew God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all we ask or think. Redouble your prayers. Maybe some Sunday school student got into trouble. He's in prison somewhere. Do you not realize God can reach him just where he is? Someone that you think is beyond hope. They're not beyond God, and he's able to reach them just where they are. May the Lord help us to go on hoping, not in circumstance, not in ourselves, but in the God of hope. And have some joy and some laughter, some holy laughter, when God rescues an 89-year-old grandmother in a prison, or an old brother who's been prayed for 70 years. Nobody's too tough for God. Keep on praying and keep on hoping.